a cancer survivor murdered in Florida.
This was certainly the most brutal way to die.
A businessman gunned down in Georgia.
The masked man shot him execution style at point-blank range.
A law student hunted like prey in Arkansas.
He shoots me under my arm right up here.
And the body count will continue to rise until the police figure out what evil force is behind this killing spree.
These cases seemingly were unrelated, but ultimately it turned out it was a house of cards just waiting to be knocked down.
Florida, November 1985. West Palm Beach residents Bob and Anita Spearman, a well-known couple around town, are celebrating their 20th anniversary.
Anita Spearman was the assistant city manager. She had just retired from her job. She was a joy to work with. Her boss spoke very highly of her.
Everyone appreciated her kindness. She was a very bright lady. It was just fun to be with her.
Anita's husband, Bob, has a very successful boat-building company in West Palm Beach.
And he had property right on the intercoastal. That any property on the water with access to the ocean is a valuable piece of property.
Along with 2 decades of marriage, the Spearmans have some good news after a long and painful struggle.
She did develop breast cancer, but I know she was recovering and that she felt that she was going to be okay.
The couple is headed to the Bahamas for an extended vacation as soon as Anita is well enough to travel. But on a Saturday morning in November, those happy plans come crashing to the ground.
He got up early. He always gets up and he goes and gets his wife something to eat. That he had gone to McDonald's, had gone by his business.
When he gets back, Bob Spearman heads up the stairs to the bedroom where Anita's sleeping and walks straight into a horrific crime scene.
When he returned home, he discovered her dead in the bedroom.
Anita lies sprawled on the bed, her pillow soaked in blood, her skull smashed in.
He immediately called 911.
Paramedics rush to the bedroom, but they're much too late. Anita's pronounced dead on the scene. Detective Bill Springer of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office immediately begins a search for clues with the crime scene investigators.
They examined the house, determined that there was no signs of any forced entry, and she appeared to have been beaten to death. There was some defensive injuries. I think some bruising on her hands, which be indicated that she put her hands up to protect herself.
Her wedding ring has been pulled from her finger, and police scour the crime scene to see what else has been stolen.
The jewelry boxes were opened, some of the drawers were pulled open, and the shotgun was missing.
Investigators wonder if the intruder might have been after something specific in the Spearman's bedroom. They can't imagine what might have inspired such a savage and vicious assault.
Here she had gone through all of this terrible surgery for breast cancer, recovery, and and she was still fighting to stay alive, to keep someone from killing her. This was certainly the most brutal way to die.
Investigators scour the home for any shred of physical evidence, but whoever killed Anita Spearman got in and out without a trace. Neighbors are questioned, but they saw and heard nothing. With no immediate leads, Detective Springer must put some tough questions to Anita's grieving husband.
You know anybody that would have a reason to murder your wife so brutally like this?
No, not at all.
Were you any arguments?
No. What kind of question is that? No.
Spearman insists that things were great between him and his wife. But Detective Springer soon learns otherwise.
I mean, in every homicide investigation, what people don't realize, all the dirty laundry is going to come out eventually. In interviewing Bob Spearman and him telling me he had no relationship with any other females, it would have been a lot better than for us to find out that he was actually lying to us.
Don't the two of you look cute? Oh. And you should just run along, you whore. This is why you're out of road.
Our investigation revealed that the affair that Bob was having was an ongoing affair, that he was having it prior to Anita's death, and that it continued on after her death.
Bob Spearman has been revealed as a liar and a cheat, giving him a classic motive to kill his wife. But as it turns out, he also has a solid alibi for the time of the murder. He ran into a business partner that morning when he was out getting breakfast, and the man vouches for him. Investigators next ask Spearman whether the crime might have been committed by an angry business associate or an overly ambitious competitor.
His land, where his marine construction business was worth $1 million back then. His home was in a nice area. It was worth a lot of money. I wouldn't say they were wealthy, but I would say that they were above the middle class.
But police are unable to find anyone with a business grudge against Bob Spearman. Without any obvious motives for the murder, authorities now turn their attention back to the streets, pursuing the idea that this crime was a robbery gone very wrong. And as the first week of the hunt comes to a close, they catch a break from a newspaper delivery girl for the Palm Beach Post.
We interviewed the newspaper delivery person. They advised that they observed an individual in the area walking down the street earlier in the morning. The description of the person was a white male wearing camouflaged clothing. Well, you don't hunt in that area. Like I say, it's a residential area, but like I say, they stood out. They thought it was unusual to see somebody that hour of the morning wearing camouflaged clothing.
What sort of burglar wears eye-catching military fatigues in broad daylight? That detail has investigators rethinking their case.
Based on the fact that there was no signs of forced entry to the house and that she was actually murdered in bed, it just didn't appear to be a burglary. I mean, for somebody to break in, go into a room with the woman sleeping and murder her, there's just no plausible reason for that. It appeared to be a staged burglary, and the motive of that person was to murder Anita Spearman.
But who in the world would target this kind, innocent woman for execution? For the moment, there's no logical answer. Detective Springer doesn't yet know that the road to solving this mystery will lead 600 miles north to the upscale Atlanta suburb of Sandy Springs, Georgia. Three months before Anita's murder, 43-year-old investment banker Richard Braun and his 16-year-old son Michael are leaving the house to run some errands.
They were coming down the hill when a masked gunman jumped out from behind some trees and had a machine pistol with him and started machine gunning them through the windshield.
There were a number of shots that penetrated the windshield. Michael was actually hit in the leg. His father opened the driver's door and rolled out of the car. When Michael saw what his father was doing, Michael rolled out of the passenger side as well.
Both badly wounded, father and son desperately crawl for safety. But their assailant is not finished with them yet.
He saw the gunman go up to where his father had tried to scramble back up toward the house.
Michael can do nothing but watch in horror.
Richard crawled away after he got out of the car. The masked man came up to him and shot him execution style at point-blank range. Michael started to try and crawl off. The masked man came up to him.
And Michael begged for his life, literally. And the gunman then put his finger to his lips and said, "Shh, be quiet." And then the gunman ran off into the woods.
Two victims, completely unrelated and hundreds of miles apart. Yet police are about to uncover a murderous web that connects them.
These cases seemingly were unrelated, but ultimately it turned out it was a house of cards just waiting to be knocked down.
After a home invasion results in the violent murder of Anita Spearman, police in Florida are left looking for a vicious killer. Their main suspect is a mystery man spotted that morning wearing military camouflage as he walked through the affluent community. Meanwhile, in Georgia, Richard Braun is gunned down in his driveway by a masked assailant. His son Michael narrowly escapes the same fate. Within minutes, police officers and detectives from the Fulton County Police Department respond to the murder scene.
They found some shell casings from that Mac 11 machine pistol.
The investigators were unable to locate any footprints. There was nothing in the car that was helpful in terms of identifying who the shooter was.
Investigators canvassed the rest of the neighborhood, but the assassin seems to have vanished into thin air. From his hospital bed, Michael gives police more details about the shooter.
He described him as having a camouflage jacket, a ski mask, and obviously the machine pistol stuck out in Michael's mind as well, but that's about all he could remember.
But Michael drops a bombshell on police. This isn't the first time someone's tried to kill his dad.
So a couple of months before he was actually executed, he and his girlfriend were driving in his van, and they noticed smoke coming out of the van. So they stopped to find out what was wrong. They got out of the van, and an explosion occurred. They were very fortunate not to have been killed by virtue of having gotten out to investigate the smoke.
Authorities started probing who might have planted the homemade bomb and why.
It was a little difficult to understand initially why anyone would want to kill a well-liked businessman who lived in a wealthy neighborhood in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia. Just like the Anita Spearman case, it didn't fit initially until you really started digging.
When the investigators look more deeply into Braun's past, they find a pile of dirt about the wealthy investment banker. Shortly after his divorce from Michael's mother years earlier, Richard started using cocaine and was soon hooked. But drugs weren't his only vice. He was also neck-deep in what's known as boiler room fraud.
A boiler room fraud involves a bank of salesmen in a large open area that are making call after call to potential victims, and they're trying to defraud them and sell them something that is virtually worthless, and they're selling it to them for a large amount of money.
At the time of the murder, Richard Braun had worked for several years for a business called Reliance Capital. The FBI was conducting an investigation into the fraud that was being perpetrated by Braun and Bruce Gasworth, who was the owner of Reliance Capital. Richard Braun was primarily responsible for the sales force that was making the calls, pitching fraudulent oil and gas leases. The company was actually very successful. They ultimately defrauded investors of more than $10 million. His cut or take from the investments that were being made by the victims was substantial.
But in the spring of 1985, 5 months before his death, Braun decides to turn over a new leaf. He starts attending regular Narcotics Anonymous meetings. And he tells his partners in crime, including top honcho Bruce Gasworth, that he wants out and that he's ready to come clean.
Braun had represented to acquaintances that he was considering basically turning state's evidence and cooperating with the FBI investigation.
Did 𝐁𝐥𝐤𝐸 and his associates have Braun gunned down before he could act as a potential FBI snitch? The gangland style of this murder could have been intended as a warning to others. In the days following the murder, Fulton County Police also discovered that Richard had been owed a large sum of money.
Well, there was a debt owed to Richard Braun from the company, and it was $400,000. Bruce 𝐁𝐥𝐸 basically refused to pay this.
That only adds fuel to the fire behind 𝐁𝐥𝐸's involvement in the murder.
𝐁𝐥𝐸 stood to benefit from the murder of Richard Braun in two ways. First, any money that he owed Richard Braun, because of the fraudulent nature of their business and their relationship, he would not have to pay that money to Richard Braun's estate. And secondly, he eliminated Richard Braun as a potential witness about the fraudulent nature of the business.
But unfortunately for police, 𝐁𝐥𝐸 wasn't anywhere near Braun's home on that bloody morning.
Bruce 𝐁𝐥𝐸 told the Fulton County Police Department that he was at a restaurant at the time of the shooting, and therefore he had an alibi.
But the shooter knew too much about Braun's schedule not to have been tipped off, and well paid to complete the hit by someone who knew Braun well.
Well, it was fairly well planned. He knew when Richard Braun was going to be leaving the house. He was well positioned behind a wooded area where he could get a good angle on him. He had a good firearm that was basically going to get the job done no matter what happened, a machine pistol. And those types of things tend to make police believe that it might be a hired hitman.
Police are certain that Richard's old boss had both the means and the methods to arrange for the contract killing. But to get 𝐁𝐥𝐸, the cops know they have to find his trigger man. Once again, the twisted trail will lead investigators over 700 miles to Fayetteville, Arkansas, 5 days after Richard Braun's death.
Fayetteville it's been home to the university for well over 100 years. At that time, we had probably 16,000, 17,000 students. It's really a relatively safe place to live.
Doug Norwood is a 30-year-old law student living alone in a one-bedroom apartment on campus.
I get up that morning, I'm on the phone to the financial aid office. And there's a knock at the door. I have a small apartment, and there's a couple of guys there.
The men at the door introduce themselves as private investigators.
They come in and they start telling me that they're looking for a law student. And I said, well, I don't know that law student.
Doug makes a couple of calls to help the men find the person they're looking for. But their story is just a ruse, and in moments, he'll be fighting for his life. Following the murder of Georgia businessman Richard Braun, police are on the lookout for a ruthless and efficient hitman. 5 days later, and 700 miles to the west in Arkansas, 30-year-old law student Doug Norwood has allowed 2 private investigators into his Fayetteville apartment. But he quickly discovers they're not who they say they are.
All of a sudden, the older man tried to touch me with a stun gun.
Norwood knows he's in serious trouble. His adrenaline kicks in. His instincts take over.
He catches me at the door as I open the door, and he tries to tackle me right there. I'm able to brush him down, and he shoots up at me. He shoots me in the back, or it's up under my arm right up here, and the bullet comes out of my chest up here.
Shot in the torso, Norwood keeps running for his life. The gunmen take aim again.
One of the bullets catches me in the meaty part of my left leg, and it goes completely through my leg. I run across the street, and there's a car parked out in front of a laundromat. It's the only car there. There's a man and a woman. Or I run up to him and I ask him to take me to the hospital. The hospital's only a couple of blocks away. They get in their car and they drive off, and I'm standing there thinking, how bad can my day get? I did not know at the time that they were the ones driving the getaway car.
By the time police arrive, there's no sign of the shooters. Within an hour, Doug Norwood is in a hospital bed, getting treated for what miraculously turns out to be non-life-threatening wounds.
They have a surgical team, and they're trying to stop all this bleeding. I recognized one of the nurses, and I told her, I said, I need you to call somebody for me. Nobody knows I'm up here. She goes, well, your Uncle Don's already called up here to check on you. I said, I don't have an Uncle Don. Nobody knows that I should be here.
Norwood knows his nightmare has just begun. His killers may be clumsy, but they're not going away. Someone wants him dead, and he won't feel safe until he finds out who and why.
I told them I was not staying at the hospital under any circumstances. They bandaged me up the best they could, and then I went into hiding.
Local investigators work the case, but they don't get far.
They just could not believe that I did not know who had shot me. And they just kept going over and over, who have you done wrong? You know, I didn't gamble, so I didn't have anybody trying to collect gambling debts. I didn't do drug dealing, so there was nobody after me for money or to get some item back.
Norwood watches every step, constantly wary of another murder attempt. And sure enough, 1 month later, it happens.
I get in the car, and it's just like you see on television. You crank the car up, and the bomb goes off.
The sound of the explosion echoes across campus as Norwood scrambles free of the smoke and flames.
I mean, it was incredibly loud. And I could see the windows were being blown out of the cars that were around me.
Whoever wants Norwood dead isn't ready to call it quits. But luckily for the law student, his killers are as incompetent as they are mysterious. Because the bombing attack was on university property, the University of Arkansas campus police now take an active interest in the puzzling case.
So they take me down, and I give them a statement. I sit there and I tell them, I said, I swear to you, I do not know who is trying to kill me.
Doug was paranoid, which he should be, because it was a fact. Someone was trying to kill him. And our job was trying to figure out who it was and try to keep him safe while he was on this campus.
Not willing to wait for a third attack to claim his life, Norwood starts carrying a gun. And that's not all.
I wore my bulletproof vest every day, and I had a specially built one to where it had a big steel plate in the front of it, to where you could have shot me with a rifle and probably not killed me.
Meanwhile, police keep a close eye on Doug and everyone around him.
Anything that would happen with Doug in Springdale, I was made aware of it. So we basically was pretty aware of everything that was going on in his life.
3 months later, Norwood is walking to class when he sees a suspicious car with out-of-state plates parked in a restricted area. And there's a man inside.
Of course, I didn't know who he was, but I knew that he didn't fit in. He was parked in the faculty parking area across from the law school. He did not have a faculty sticker. He had a Texas license plate. He was in the car. Odd.
Norwood wastes no time in calling Jim Swearenden and describing the strange vehicle following him.
We went outside and got in our unmarked unit and drove to that parking lot, and lo and behold, we observed the vehicle that Doug had described still driving through the parking lot.
The man eventually leaves the campus. Swearenden and his partner follow and pull him over.
We had to deal with the possibility that he was armed and he may try to fire on us.
After Swearenden's partner looks in the suspect's back seat, he signals that it's the right guy.
And when I looked up at John, he was going like this. In other words, cuff him.
The man's name is Michael Wayne Jackson, and he claims he's an ex-Texas police officer looking to attend the local law school. but his cache of assault weapons in the back seat and throughout his car suggest otherwise.
And so I had lay across the trunk, got his hands behind his back and handcuffed him.
Michael Wayne Jackson is brought in for interrogation. He soon gives up not only the name of the man who hired him to kill Doug Norwood, but the astonishing way the two first came into contact.
He was hired through an ad in Soldier of Fortune magazine.
The contract hit on Doug Norwood is just the tip of the iceberg, as investigators expose a web of aspiring hitmen advertising their services on the back pages of a national magazine. A businessman gunned down in the driveway of his Georgia home, and a city official bludgeoned to death in her own bedroom in Florida. Authorities have no reason to believe these murders are connected until they hear the confession of Michael Wayne Jackson, a hitman captured for the attempted murder of law student Doug Norwood in Arkansas.
He immediately implicated a man named Larry Gray, who was a businessman in Tulsa who had arranged to try to kill Doug Norwood.
Doug is as surprised as anyone. Larry Gray, the man Jackson says hired him to kill the law student, is the jealous ex-husband of his friend Kathy.
She would talk to me and explain to me that her relationship with Larry was not good at all. They had been living apart various times over the period of time that they'd been married.
Larry began writing Kathy obsessive letters and tapping her phone. Now, it appears he would stop at nothing to eliminate any potential suitors, starting with Doug.
There wasn't actually a relationship as you would think of before I got shot. And so that's why I couldn't imagine anybody wanting to shoot me, because I wouldn't do anything at that point.
But as Jackson explains how he first came into contact with Larry Gray, his story astonishes investigators. There's a man in Tennessee who people can call when they have a problem that won't go away. The man's name is Richard Savage, and Jackson has been part of his hitman crew for the past 7 months. When police ask him how Savage's clients get in touch with him, Jackson tells them it's all arranged through a mercenary for hire ad in a magazine.
I went right out and picked up Soldier of Fortune magazine, looked at it, and I'm looking at all the advertisements going, oh my God, what is this?
The advertisements did not come out and specifically say, we will kill someone. However, the wording was such that it left very little to the imagination.
Investigators come across an ad with an address in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. They trace the phone number to a bar called the Continental Club. Its owner, Richard Savage.
The Continental Club was a strip club that Savage had in Gatlinburg. It appeared to be a more or less of a lower class type of strip club.
The Continental Club is Richard Savage's last legitimate business venture before he spends $87 on a few lines in the back pages of a June '85 issue of Soldier of Fortune magazine.
I think most of the contacts that were made with Savage were made through the advertisement that he placed in the Soldier of Fortune magazine.
In the 7 months Michael Wayne Jackson has worked for Savage, he's participated in a number of hits, almost all of them unsuccessful.
Well, they were a group of misfits, really, and it was like the gang who couldn't shoot straight. They tried over and over to kill people, and they failed most of the time, thank God.
But unfortunately, not all the gang's contracts were botched. Jackson knows of at least 2 successful hits. Richard Braun in Georgia and Anita Spearman in Florida. Both apparently arranged by Richard Savage. Both targets were taken down by Savage's star hitman, the only member of the gang with a confirmed kill, 21-year-old 𝐁𝐥𝐤𝐬. 6 months earlier, 𝐁𝐥𝐤𝐬 saw Richard Savage's ad in Soldier of Fortune as a career opportunity. He arrives at the Continental Club in Tennessee.
𝐁𝐥𝐤𝐬 was a young man in his early 20s, largely on his own since he was a teenager. He didn't have a lot of support or family contacts, and became part of Savage's circle.
To prove that 𝐁𝐥𝐤𝐬 was the one who killed Richard Braun and Anita Spearman, authorities will need more than the word of known felon Michael Wayne Jackson.
He was a spark that ignited the fire. He provided the information to get us going.
A few weeks later, with a massive multi-state investigation already underway, authorities get lucky. Officers in the small community of Athens, Georgia, pull over a young man who'd been trying to skip town without paying his hotel bill.
The Maryville Police Department had stopped 𝐁𝐥𝐤𝐬 in a car that was reported stolen. In that vehicle, they discovered jewelry, a shotgun, and that they had taken that into evidence. Ran the serial number on the gun prior to destroying it and discovered it had been stolen in North Palm Beach.
The serial number matches the shotgun that was stolen from the Spearman residence on the morning that Anita was killed. Within an hour, he's under the lights of an interrogation room, getting threatened with weapons charges. Hoping for leniency, he, like Jackson, starts spilling the beans, pointing the finger back at Richard Savage.
And they get enough out of 𝐁𝐥𝐤𝐬 to make a case on him to arrest him for complicity in the murder, and then they're going to try and build a case on all the other things he's involved in.
Based on 𝐁𝐥𝐤𝐬's confession, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms agents, along with the Knox County Sheriff's Department, surround Savage's home. The failed entrepreneur agrees to go quietly. But in the interrogation room, Savage has a story of his own all ready to go.
People started bringing me money. I just took it. That's it.
He insists that he was running a scam. He only took the money. He never intended to carry out the jobs. If anyone was killed or hurt, his employees must have been acting on their own. Though his story seems ridiculous, police must prove that Savage gave the kill orders to get a murder conviction.
Well, once we had all these different suspects in custody, about 5 different shooters, and then Savage, who was running the operation, they were all pointing the fingers at one another and not admitting any culpability themselves. So the whole thing was a little bit of a he said, she said, and it was turning into a mess.
To untangle fact from fiction, investigators track down the remaining members of Savage's crew. First up is Ron Emmert, an ex-employee of the Continental Club, now serving time in a Tennessee prison for multiple felonies. Like the other alleged hitmen, this one's more than willing to make a deal in exchange for the name of the person who had committed the murder of Anita Spearman. In Tennessee, federal investigators interrogate Ron Emmert, an accomplice in Richard Savage's hitman ring. In exchange for immunity, he's willing to tell the story of a contract killing in Florida, the murder of Anita Spearman.
Savage would receive the calls at the Continental Club, which is the number he had put in the advertisement at Soldier of Fortune magazine as a gun for hire. Once he got the calls and decided to accept the job, he would decide which of his contract killers he would use, put some money together for them, put the plan together, and send them on their way.
One quiet afternoon at the Continental Club, Richard Savage approaches employees Ron Emmert and 𝐁𝐥𝐤𝐬. He tells them they're heading to Florida for a job. He tells Emmert to handle the cash, but wants 𝐁𝐥𝐤𝐬 to take care of the target, a woman named Anita Spearman. 2 days later, Emmert and 𝐁𝐥𝐤𝐬 check into a Florida Econo Lodge in West Palm Beach. At daybreak, 𝐁𝐥𝐸 calls the client. A meeting is arranged. At about 2 p.m., they pull up behind a Denny's restaurant. 𝙬𝙬 has a submachine gun in his lap and can't wait to fulfill his mission.
There he is. Is that him? It's gotta be.
Eventually, a black Chevy Blazer pulls up behind them. 𝐁𝐿𝐸 tells 𝙬𝙬 to wait. He'll deal with the client alone. Entering the truck, 𝐁𝐸𝐸 meets the client face to face. It's none other than Bob Spearman. Possibly out of guilt, he lies about his real motivation for the hit, making it seem he is being merciful to his cancer-ridden wife.
And Spearman tells him that he loves his wife, but that she's in a lot of pain, and he wants to alleviate that pain and wants them to take care of it.
In fact, his wife was recovering from cancer at the time, making it difficult for Spearman to continue his extramarital affair. Spearman gives 𝐁𝐸𝐸 specific instructions. The crime should look like a burglary, and he doesn't want his wife to suffer. He then gives 𝐁𝐸𝐸𝐸 his home address and tells him he'll leave one of the back doors unlocked. Then he hands over a brown envelope filled with cash. The price of the contract? $20,000.
𝐁𝐸𝐸𝐸 went back to Tennessee with the money from Spearman, and 𝙬𝙬 was left in Palm Beach County to commit the murder.
But as the days pass, Anita Spearman is still alive and getting stronger and healthier every day. Spearman becomes increasingly frustrated that no one has broken into his home and completed the mission.
𝐁𝐸𝐸𝐸 said that Spearman kept calling Savage, threatening them that if they didn't do the job, I guess he was going to do them harm.
Now flush with money, 𝙬𝙬 seems to have forgotten about the hit. He spends his cash on his girlfriend and a new tape deck and stereo system installed in his car. Finally, 2 weeks later, the money has run out, and Sean 𝙬𝙬 decides to show up for work.
The point of entry was through a garage door that was normally locked. It wasn't pried, it wasn't jimmied, it was unlocked, so they gained entry right into the house. Plus, the door leading from the garage into the house was also unlocked.
𝙬𝙬 heads directly for the bedroom. He sees Anita laying there, sleeping. He remembers his orders. Make it look like a burglary. Make sure she doesn't suffer. Detective Bill Springer needs to get a positive ID on Bob Spearman to confirm he's the one who ordered the hit. He shows 𝐁𝐸𝐸𝐸 a photo lineup.
All our photo lineups contain 6 photos of people that look similar to our suspect or who we want picked out. And once we lay it out, Ron 𝐁𝐸𝐸𝐸 went right to it and pointed out Spearman as a person he met.
With 𝐁𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸's testimony and ID, police can arrest the man truly responsible for Anita Spearman's murder.
The sheriff walked up to him and said, "You knew who I am?" And Spearman said, "Yes." And the sheriff said, "We have a warrant for your arrest for the murder of your wife, Anita Spearman," at which time he was arrested. And he appeared to be very shocked. When I put him in the holding cell, he told me, he says, "You have the wrong person." And I told him, "No, I don't. I have your shotgun and I have Ron 𝐁𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸." And that was the last conversation I had with Bob Spearman.
Meanwhile, the FBI wraps up the murder of Richard Braun, who was savagely gunned down in his own driveway. also the handiwork of Sean Dutre, according to hitman Michael Wayne Jackson.
We started to piece everything together. We managed to figure out that Dutre was the shooter for the Braun killing and that Savage was behind that, and we put lots of other pieces together as well.
There's more than enough evidence and testimony to arrest both Dutre and Savage. With the two of them behind bars, investigators are now determined to find out who the mysterious client was behind Braun's murder.
It's difficult to convict the person who hired the contract killer. You may know who did it, but you can't prove it until you arrest that contract shooter and then ultimately get him to flip on or get evidence that connects him to the person who hired him.
Under pressure from police, Dutre and Savage quickly rat out the person police have suspected all along. Braun's old boss, Richard 𝐿𝐥𝐻𝑡𝑡.
𝐿𝐥𝐻𝑡𝑡 paid $10,000 to have Richard Braun killed. That money was paid to Richard Savage, and it's always been my assumption that Savage paid Dutre some part of the money that he got for committing the murder.
Sean Dutre and Richard Savage are convicted in two separate trials for their roles in the death of Anita Spearman and Richard Braun.
Yeah, as we concluded all these criminal cases, Soldier of Fortune was getting sued by all the relatives of these victims. So there was lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. And I believe that ultimately some law was passed that prohibited this type of advertisement in the future.
In Doug Norwood's case, Kathy's husband Larry Gray ultimately confesses to hiring Doug's would-be killers. He gets 25 years behind bars.
I've been married to Kathy now for like 26 years, but initially I was about to get shot and killed for running around with a woman that I really wasn't running around with at the time. He just thought that I was.
In Florida, Bob Spearman is found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder. He's sentenced to life in a federal penitentiary.
During the entire trial, Spearman thought that he was going to be acquitted of the charges. And when the jury came back, I mean, it was very emotional for me. You have a true innocent victim like Anita Spearman, it's a lot of satisfaction when you hear that guilty verdict.
But life behind bars proved to be too much for this cold-hearted coward.
He hung himself in prison. Couldn't escape. And when you look at the whole picture, he could have simply got a divorce, had half the money, and rode off into the sunset with his girlfriend and been alive today. But he lost it all for nothing. For greed.